I am the last archivist who remembers the full account, and I have chosen not to publish it. This is not cowardice. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the discipline of my order, and I have kept this discipline for 43 years of service to the Veth-Camry Conclave's archive of formal encounters. I have sealed contested battle records. I have redacted testimony that would have started 3 wars. I have quietly lost a deposition given by a species elder who confessed things about the conclave's early border policies that no sitting council member wanted read into the permanent ledger. I am not frightened by difficult truth. I am the one the conclave sends its difficult truths to, precisely because I can hold them without flinching, and without the particular anxiety that afflicts people who need the record to confirm what they already believe. I am choosing not to publish this one for a different reason. The reason is that I went, 3 years ago, to find Commander Verksal. He is old now, older than I expected. The formal challenge at Keth Severon was not the end of his service, only the end of his command posting, and he spent another decade in administrative roles before his retirement. He lives in the northern tier of the Tareth homeworld, in a region of low mineral ridges and shallow brackish rivers, where the sky during the long twilight season turns the particular shade of violet that Tareth biology is said to find calming. His dwelling is small. His compound is smaller still than his rank would once have warranted. The compound does not display his decorations or his service citations, which is unusual for a Tareth officer of his standing. They usually line the walls of their retirement dwellings like a biography written in metal and ribbon. His walls held maps, old ones, border corridor charts from the compact era, some of them going back to the earliest Keth Severon surveys. I noticed, when I sat with him in his main room, that the only corridor he had not charted extensively was the one in which human space lies. He did not appear surprised when I arrived. I told him I was the conclave's archive of formal encounters, that I held the sealed file on Keth Severon, and that I was there to give him the opportunity to speak, on the record, for posterity, before the file was classified at the highest tier and locked for a century. He looked at me for a long time, not unfriendly, not afraid, the look of a very old soldier who has already decided what he will and will not say, and is simply measuring whether the person in front of him is worth the energy of the refusal. Then he said, "You want to know what I remember?" I said yes. He said, "The official record is what it is. I signed it." I said I knew that. I said I was asking what he remembered. He was quiet for the full duration of the twilight color shift, which on that part of the homeworld runs approximately 40 minutes. I have sat in silence across from reluctant subjects for the full span of my career. I know when silence is refusal and when it is something else. His silence was something else. It had weight. It had a specific shape, the way a load-bearing wall has a different quality of stillness than a partition. Then he said, "She didn't lose." I asked him to clarify. He said, "The record says she was restrained." She was. The record says the challenge was ruled inconclusive. It was. I signed it. All of that is true. He paused. "She didn't lose." I asked him what happened. He told me. I am going to record it here in this sealed file because it is the archivist's discipline to record what actually happened. The sealed file is not published. It is not classified in the sense of destroyed. It exists in the deepest tier of the conclave's permanent record, where it will remain for 100 years, after which whatever generation of scholars finds it will be equipped to understand it or will not be. That is not my problem. My problem is precision, and I will be precise. This is the account of what happened at Keth Severon, in the 42nd year of the Keth Severon Compact, at the formal summit between the Veth-Camry Conclave and the delegation, from what the Human Diplomatic Corps was then designating as its reach-tier outpost authority. I will give the official record first as it was filed, then I will give the rest. The official record runs to 11 pages in the conclave's standard notation. I will summarize it, because the 11 pages are largely procedural, and the precision of the procedural record is not where the weight of the event lives. The Keth platform is, or was, before the compact expired, the conclave's primary border dialogue facility in that corridor. It occupies a fixed orbital position above the fourth moon of a gas giant on the edge of the zone the Human Navigational Authority designates as the Outer Reach. The platform is configured as a neutral ground, 3 tiers of meeting chambers, a formal address hall, quarters for delegations of up to 40 members, and a lower level designated for what the conclave's compact language calls demonstrative exchanges, which, in practice, means the room where things get settled when the words stop working. The summit had been running for 9 days when the incident occurred. The agenda was a compact renewal. The conclave's position, as recorded in the pre-summit briefs, was that the compact should be renewed with modifications to the exclusion zone language. Specifically, that the Human Reach Tier Authority should accept a formal redefinition of the navigation boundary that would have moved it 42 light-years further from the conclave's outer monitoring stations. The Reach Tier delegation's position was that the boundary did not move. 9 days of that. I have read the transcript. It is a monument to institutional stubbornness on both sides, and it would have eventually produced either a modified compact or an extended impasse, the way these things usually do. The conclave has been doing compact negotiations since before the Tarath joined it, and the Tarath have been doing them since before most of the other member species developed orbital capability. Nobody was going to do anything drastic. Commander Verksal was not part of the compact delegation. He was the senior Tarath military observer, present in his formal capacity as the conclave's ranking officer for that corridor, a role that carries significant ceremony and limited actual authority in a diplomatic context. He was there because the Tarath insisted on a military presence at border compacts as a matter of tradition, and he was the appropriate rank, and it was, by all prior indications, the kind of assignment that goes on a senior officer's record as a sign of institutional trust and results in a great deal of boredom. He had been bored for 9 days. On the 10th day, the Reach Tier delegation held what was formally described in the summit agenda as a capabilities demonstration, a standard diplomatic practice in that era, where one party or the other would briefly exhibit something relevant to the compact discussion. Usually this meant technology, display screens showing resource extraction yields, or navigational range data, or population projections. The Reach Tier delegation had done one on day 3 about their monitoring infrastructure. The conclave's delegation had done one on day 5 about the compact's historical dispute resolution mechanism. What the Reach Tier delegation filed for day 10 was described in the agenda as a physical capabilities assessment. The filing was brief, and I have read it. It said a delegate would demonstrate hand-to-hand combat proficiency as relevant to the compact's security capability clauses. This was technically within the agenda's parameters. The security capability clauses exist in border compacts because they allow both parties to make representations about what their respective forces can and cannot do, and physical capability demonstrations by military or security personnel are an accepted, if uncommon, form of that representation. The conclave's compact council signed off on it. Nobody flagged it. Commander Verksal, per the witness depositions I have read, watched this agenda item arrive and made a decision that his depositions describe as impulsive, and that I believe, based on my reading of his record and my subsequent conversation with him, was something considerably more calculated than impulsive. He submitted a formal observer's addendum, a mechanism that allows the conclave's military observer to request participation in a demonstrative exchange for the purpose of the conclave's own capabilities assessment, and he filed it that evening. The Reach-tier delegation accepted it. The formal record does not dwell on why. I have my own theory about why, which I will not record here because it is inference, and I try to keep inference out of the archive record. What the record does say is that the acceptance was filed without qualification, without a request for parameter discussion, and without any notation about who would serve as the Reach-tier's participant. The demonstrative exchange took place in the lower level of the Keth-Severon platform on the morning of the summit's 10th day. The chamber designated for it is approximately 20 meters on a side, with a composite floor and lighting calibrated to neutral task levels. There are fixed observation points at 3 elevations, and all 3 were occupied. The compact delegations on both sides, the platform's neutral administrative staff, and the various attached observers and aides that accumulate around summit facilities like sediment. Commander Verksal was 51 years old at the time. He was, by the Tarath's own assessment criteria, in excellent physical condition for his age and rank. The Tarath are a tall species, longer-limbed than most of the conclave's members, with a lateral muscle density that their own medical literature describes as approximately 40% above the conclave's cross-species average for bipedal forms of similar mass. They evolved in a high-gravity environment and carry the physiological legacy of that evolution in their skeleton and musculature both. Verksal was not an especially large Tarath, but he was not a small one, and he had been a combat officer for 3 decades before his promotion to command rank. He had never been in a physical contest he did not win. The Reach-tier delegation sent a woman. The official record identifies her by her diplomatic designation, Reach-tier Security Attaché, 3rd grade. Her name is not in the official record. This is standard compact protocol. Participants in demonstrative exchanges are identified by function rather than name to preserve the institutional nature of the representation. The record notes her physical characteristics only as required by the capability assessment format. Height, approximate mass, species designation human, standard baseline, age notation adult, mid-career range. She was, by the witness accounts in the depositions, not large. Not for a human, and humans are not large compared to most of the conclave's member species to begin with. She was described by the conclave's compact council, who filed a brief deposition at my request, years later, as unremarkable in physical presentation. Another witness used the phrase, quietly assembled. A third said she walked into the chamber the way someone walks through a room they have already memorized. Commander Verksal, in the account he gave me on his homeworld 3 years ago, did not describe her physical appearance at all. He said she came in and she looked at the room and then she looked at me, not at the chamber, at me. And I understood that she had looked at the room to confirm where I was standing, not because she was uncertain. He paused there, the way he paused several times during the account, not for effect I concluded, but because he was being precise, and precision sometimes requires stopping to verify that the words are accurate before you let them go. I had competed against 47 opponents in formal or semi-formal settings across my career, he said. I know what someone looks like when they are assessing the situation. I know what someone looks like when they have already assessed it. She had already assessed it. She had assessed it before she entered the room. The formal parameters of the exchange were light. Established at the pre-exchange protocol meeting, a single engagement, no weapons, terminus at first submission or incapacitation of either party or mutual agreement to conclude. Duration uncapped. The neutral platform staff would observe for safety compliance. The diplomatic delegations would observe as witnesses to the capability representation. The record notes that Commander Verksal opened the exchange. What the record does not note is how he opened it. He told me. I had been briefed on human physiology to the standard that the conclave's military intelligence provides for species encountered in border compact contexts, he said, which is not a deep briefing. It is a functional briefing. Bipedal, bilateral symmetry, baseline adaptation to a standard gravity environment, oxygen respiration, standard biological vulnerabilities at the joints and the cervical structure. Nothing in the briefing suggested anything unusual. Nothing suggested I should approach differently than I would approach any other opponent of similar size and species profile. He looked at his hands for a moment. The Tareth gesture for reflection. I have dealt with enough Tareth in my archival career to recognize it. I came in fast, he said. Lateral commitment. It's effective against bipedal opponents with standard bilateral coordination because it forces the target into a rotational response on a weight-loaded foot. The transition into the counterpressure lock from that opening is something I had executed successfully 31 times in documented engagements. I did not count the undocumented ones. There were more. He stopped. She wasn't there, he said. I asked him to explain. I mean, she wasn't where the calculation said she would be. The rotational response I described, where the target's foot is loaded when they turn to face the lateral approach, she didn't do it. She moved laterally herself, in the same direction I came from, which is not the natural rotation. You do not move into the direction of a lateral approach if your training is in standard bilateral response. It creates a crossing line. It should put you in worse position. I registered this as an error on her part. I adjusted for it. I was inside my own adjustment before I understood that she had not made an error. He paused again. She had not moved away from me, he said. She had moved to be on my outside. The crossing line was mine, not hers. I have, in my years of archival work, documented a significant number of formal combat exchanges in various diplomatic and institutional contexts across the conclave's compact history. I am not a combat practitioner. I understand the mechanics only through the descriptions I have read and the depositions I have taken. But I have spent 4 decades listening to people describe what happened in rooms where things went wrong, and I have developed a specific sensitivity to the moment, in a deposition when the speaker reaches the pivot point. The moment they understood, inside the event, that the situation was not what they had believed it to be. Commander Verksal reached that moment quietly, the way a very controlled person reaches any difficult place, without theater, without the particular quality of self-pity that lesser men deploy around their reversals. He simply arrived at it and reported what he found there. She was already past my outside when I recognized what she had done, he said. What followed was, I want to be accurate about this, not a technique I had encountered. Not in the briefing material, not in any documented record from the conclave's exchange database that I had access to as a senior officer. What she did next was not one thing. It was a sequence. A very short sequence, which I say not to minimize it, but because the brevity was itself part of what was effective about it. It took the time it takes, and what it did was not inflict damage. She could have. The position she moved through, twice, clearly, she was in a position where the logical terminus of the sequence was significant damage to my person, and she did not take it. She moved past those positions, past where damage would have happened and into something else. I asked what she was doing instead. Demonstrating, he said. That is what I eventually understood, not fighting me. Not winning over me. Demonstrating to me specifically, with a precision that I now believe was entirely intentional, exactly how far past my defensive capability the sequence could go without actually going there. She was showing me the edge, rather than pushing me over it, and the edge was further from where I was standing than I had thought it was, much further. He was quiet for a moment. We ran it again, he said. 4 more times, different approaches on my part each time. She was, I have tried to find the precise word for 40 years. She was patient, not passive, patient. There is a distinction. Passive is when someone accepts what is done to them. Patient is when someone is waiting for the thing they have already seen. I asked him what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that patience. He said, cold, not in a hostile sense, cold in the sense of a very large thing that has been there for a long time and will continue to be there after you are gone. Cold in the way that deep space is cold, not because it wants to harm you, but because its scale does not include you in its calculations. I had been in difficult combat situations in my career. I had been in situations where I was genuinely uncertain of the outcome. I had never been in a situation where I felt entirely peripheral to the person I was competing against. The official record describes the exchange as extended. This is accurate in duration. The session ran for approximately 2 hours, which is substantially longer than the typical demonstrative exchange. The official record attributes this to the comprehensive nature of the capabilities assessment. The official record says that Commander Verksal concluded the session by requesting suspension of the exchange, and that the neutral platform staff acknowledged the request and terminated the session. This is accurate. The official record says the exchange was ruled inconclusive by mutual notation. This is also accurate. The official record says the reach-tier security attaché was escorted from the chamber at the conclusion of the session. This is accurate. The official record does not say that Commander Verksal remained in the chamber for 40 minutes after the session concluded, alone, and that when the platform's administrative officer came to collect him for the post-session protocol review, he was sitting on the composite floor. I know about the 40 minutes because one of the platform's administrative staff filed a deposition with me, voluntarily, when I was completing the archive file 17 years after the event. She had been junior staff at the time, in her first posting, and she had not known whether what she witnessed was significant enough to report through formal channels, and by the time she understood that it might be, enough time had passed that she feared it would seem like she had withheld it, so she had not reported it. The guilt of archivally significant observations unreported is one of the most common things I encounter in this work. People sit on things for years, and then one day they find out there is a sealed file, and they call the archivist's office and ask if it is too late. It is never too late in the archival sense. The archive is for permanence, not for speed. She said she came to collect Commander Verksal, and he was sitting on the floor, not injured, not in apparent distress, simply sitting on the floor of the chamber with his back against the wall farthest from the entrance, looking at the space in the center of the room. She asked if he needed assistance. He said no. She asked if he was ready to proceed to the post-session protocol review. He said he would be there shortly, and please give him a few minutes. She waited outside the door. She said the 40 minutes is an estimate. She did not time it precisely. She said when he came out he was completely composed. His uniform was correctly arranged. He walked with his standard command bearing. He said thank you for waiting, and he proceeded directly to the protocol review, and he said nothing at the review about the chamber or the 40 minutes or anything that would have indicated anything unusual had occurred. She said, I always wondered what he was thinking about in there. I told her I would ask him. When I asked him, on his homeworld with the twilight colors shifting in the windows, he looked at me for a long time before he answered. I was thinking about what I had seen, he said, not the specific techniques. I am a professional. I understand that other species develop different approaches and that I was encountering an approach I had not been briefed on, and that with appropriate study and preparation the encounter would have gone differently. I am not, he stopped. I was not thinking about having lost an exchange. I was thinking about something else. I waited. The briefing I had received, he said, was a functional military intelligence briefing on human physiology. It described humans as a baseline species. Bilateral symmetry, standard adaptation, normal variation across the galactic mean for bipedal oxygen-breathing forms, average, below average in some parameters, nothing to distinguish them from the 40 or 50 species the conclave encounters regularly in this corridor. He paused. She was not that, he said. What I encountered in that room was not an above-average member of a below-average species. What I encountered was something that had been prepared, systematically, over a long period of time. In a way I did not have a framework for. He looked at his hands again. I am a Tarath combat officer. I understand preparation. I understand what a prepared person looks like, what their body does differently when it has been trained to a high level in a specific approach. I have seen this in many species, including species with superior physical baselines to the Tarath. I know what I am looking at when I look at a highly prepared person. He stopped. What I encountered was not preparation, he said. Or it was preparation, but the word is too small. What I encountered was a person who had been made into something different, not trained, made. There is a distinction. A trained person has added things to what they were. What I encountered was a person from whom things had been removed. All the parts that slow you down, all the hesitation, all the calculation, whatever happens in the space between seeing a thing and responding to it, whatever lives in that space, it was not there in her. And what was there instead, I did not have a name for. I want to pause here and note something. I have, over the course of assembling this file, found 9 other depositions from the compact period, from the border corridors adjacent to human space, from the records of 7 different species, that contain similar language. Similar in a specific way, not in a general way. Not the language of surprise at human capability, which appears frequently in the archive record and is not unusual and does not concern me. Something more specific. The language of people who have encountered something in a human individual that they did not have a word for, and that they subsequently found that the briefing materials had not prepared them to encounter. Let me describe 3 of them. The first is a deposition from a Sarathi fleet navigator, filed 13 years before the Kethseveron incident, in a border corridor 3 systems north of the Reach. She had been serving on a joint transit vessel operating under a mixed crew compact, and she had been assigned, as a standard efficiency evaluation, to work a navigation shift alongside a human crew member. The deposition was filed as part of a standard post-compact review, and it was flagged as low priority by the reviewing office and never followed up on. It sat in the archive's secondary stack for 22 years before I found it. She wrote, and I am summarizing from her original notation, which is in the Sarathi formal register, that she had expected the human to be competent. The compact specified a minimum proficiency tier, and the human met it. What she had not expected was the quality of his attention to the navigation suite during the 9-hour shift. She wrote, he did not appear to fatigue in his attention. The instrument review cycle requires sustained focus across the full shift duration, and it is standard, among all species I have crewed with, for focus to degrade toward the 3rd and 5th hour. His did not. I tested this by varying the intervals of the review cycle without announcement. He adapted without comment. In the 9th hour, he was as precise as in the 1st. I do not have a category for this in the Sarathi physiological literature, and I filed this notation in case it is relevant to future crew assignment decisions. Nobody followed up on the notation. The review officer logged it as non-actionable individual variation. The second deposition comes from a Vethrathal medical examiner, working as part of a species health compact panel 4 years after Kethseveron. He had been conducting a standard baseline health survey of diplomatic personnel from various species, including a small human delegation, and had performed voluntary physiological assessments. He filed a lengthy deposition about the human subjects, of which I will describe only 2 findings. The first was the standard Vethrathal assessment of what they call the recovery index, the body's measured ability to return to physiological baseline after stress level activity. He wrote that the human subjects, assessed against the galactic cross-species mean, had recovery indices in the upper quartile. This was notable but not exceptional. Several species assess above the mean. What was exceptional, he noted, was the variance pattern. He wrote, in most species, subjects at the upper end of the recovery index achieve it through one of two mechanisms. Either they have a naturally rapid physiological response to stress, or they have developed specific conditioning practices that enhance baseline recovery. The human subjects showed a third pattern which I have not previously encountered in 14 years of cross-species medicine. Their upper quartile recovery index appeared to be a function of neither natural physiology nor specific conditioning, but of an overall systemic efficiency that I cannot attribute to any single factor. Their physiologies appeared to be running leaner than the baseline, as if decades of evolutionary pressure had refined out the inefficiencies that accumulate in most species systems over equivalent developmental timescales. The second finding was simpler. He had asked each subject, as a standard component of the assessment, what their greatest physical stressor was in their current role. Most species describe stressors in one of several recognized categories: environmental adaptation difficulty, task repetition fatigue, disrupted rest cycles, social stress. The human subjects answered in a way he found unusual. The majority described their greatest stressor not as a specific physical or environmental condition, but as the gap between what they had prepared for and what the deployment had actually required of them. He wrote, their stressor was not the difficulty itself, but the discrepancy. They tolerated the difficulty. What they found costly was the mismatch between anticipated challenge and actual challenge. This orientation toward the gap between preparation and reality is, in my clinical experience, atypical. Most species stress responses are triggered primarily by the difficulty level. The human response appeared to be triggered primarily by the surprise of a difficulty level other than what they had planned for. They were most stressed not when things were hardest, but when things were hardest in a way they had not anticipated. He filed this under psychological variation within species normal range. Nobody followed up. The third deposition I want to describe was not from the border corridor at all. It was from a conclave cultural archive, filed by a Tereth historian, not a military officer, an academic, who had spent a period of approximately 4 years embedded with a human research station in a sector where academic compact exchanges were then common. She was specifically studying human institutional memory, which was her field of specialty, and she had access to the research station's historical materials and to the humans themselves as interview subjects. She wrote a long monograph which is in the cultural archive and is publicly available and is not part of this sealed file. But she also filed a private addendum with the Archive of Formal Encounters, flagged as off-record, which is part of this sealed file. In the private addendum, she wrote that she had, over the 4 years, become increasingly troubled by something she could not quantify in the public monograph. She wrote, I study institutional memory. I know how species keep their history. I know the shapes that loss and adaptation and survival take in the long record of a species' accumulated experience. What I encountered in the human historical materials was not unusual in its content. They have had the history that a species in their developmental range typically has, but unusual in its structure. The structure of their memory of suffering is different from any species I have studied. In most species, the memory of historical suffering accumulates into one of two shapes. It becomes a wound that the culture circles around and cannot touch, or it becomes a closed chapter that the culture officially concludes and marks as past. Human historical suffering has a third shape that I do not have a word for in the Tereth register. It neither closes nor remains raw. It is incorporated. It becomes part of the structure. Not a wound and not a scar, but something built into the load-bearing architecture. The way the knowledge of previous failures is built into the design of something that must not fail again. I have been trying to write about this for 4 years, and I cannot write about it in the public monograph because I do not have the vocabulary, and I am not sure the vocabulary exists in any language I know. What I can say in this private addendum, which I trust will be sealed, is this: whatever humans have been through, they did not survive it by recovering from it. They survived it by becoming something that could hold it without breaking, and they have been becoming that thing for a very long time, and I am not confident any of us have a full account of how long. She asked that the addendum be sealed and not attributed. I honored both requests. I have changed no details that would identify her. I am recording these 3 depositions here because they are relevant to what Commander Verksal described, and because the pattern they suggest, when added to the 6 others I found across the compact period, is one that the archive's official record does not currently contain. The official record of human capability assessments in the border corridors describes humans as a baseline species with individual variation. It contains no notation of any systematic pattern in the individual variation. It contains no cross-file analysis that would surface the pattern I have described. This is not a deliberate omission. It is a structural artifact of how the archive organizes its material, by compact, by corridor, by species pair, not by cross-species pattern. The 9 depositions I found are in 9 different archive sections, filed under 9 different organizational categories, and nobody had ever read them in sequence. I read them in sequence because I was building a sealed file, and I had the access and the mandate to pull any relevant material. The pattern I found is: in border corridor encounters spanning 47 years and 7 different species, observers who encounter human personnel in direct individual interaction, not in fleet contexts, not in bureaucratic or institutional contexts, but direct one-on-one file, with significantly greater frequency than baseline, notations that contain some version of the same observation. That the human individual in question was operating in a register they did not have a category for. Not better than expected, not more capable than the briefing suggested, something categorically different from what the briefing framework was built to assess. I am an archivist. I do not draw conclusions from patterns. I record that the pattern exists. When I returned to Commander Verksal's account, I asked him about this. I described the 9 depositions without identifying the speakers. I asked if any of it matched what he had experienced. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Yes, but I want to add something." I waited. The 9 depositions you describe, they found the same thing I found, which is a human operating in a register they didn't have a category for. And the implication of what you're describing is that this is some unusual capability humans have, that they are more capable in certain ways than the briefing says, and that this is a discovery, a surprise, something the conclave didn't know. He paused. "That's not what stayed with me," he said. "What stayed with me is not the capability. It's the fact that she knew how to show it to me, not just that she had it, that she had been taught or had learned or had developed on her own a way of demonstrating it that was calibrated to what I could receive. She did not overwhelm me. She showed me precisely as much as I could process. She measured what I could hold, and she showed me exactly that much and stopped there. And that calibration, the precision of it, the care of it, that is not the skill of someone who has this capability and happens to be showing it to me. That is the skill of someone who has shown this to other people before, many other people, over a long time, who has had enough practice at calibrating the demonstration to know exactly how much to show and when to stop." He looked at me. "She was not surprising me," he said. "She was introducing me. There is a difference. Surprising someone is incidental. Introducing someone is deliberate. I have been in both situations. What happened in that room was an introduction, and an introduction implies a relationship between the person being introduced and the thing they are being introduced to. She was introducing me to something she was already in a long relationship with. Something she understood well enough to control how much of it I saw at once. He paused again. That is what the 40 minutes was about, he said. I was sitting on the floor of that room thinking about the difference between a surprise and an introduction, and thinking about what it meant that humans had apparently been introducing things to people in that corridor for a long time, without the conclave's assessment documents containing any record that the introductions had happened. I asked him what he concluded. He said, nothing certain, only that the conclave's assessment documents describe what the conclave has been told, and that what the conclave has been told may not be the same as what has been happening. The compact renewal was concluded 17 days after the demonstrative exchange. The boundary language was not modified. The conclave accepted the existing exclusion zone terms. The Tareth military observer filed a standard post-summit assessment that described the negotiations as productive and the overall state of the Keth-Severon Compact as stable. Commander Verksal wrote that assessment. He resigned his command posting 8 months later. The official reason on file is voluntary transition to administrative placement. This is not unusual for officers at his career stage, and the file draws no flag on the transition. He served 10 years in administrative posts, was decorated twice for institutional service, and retired in good standing. He is remembered within the Tareth Officer Corps as a capable and disciplined officer with a strong diplomatic border posting record. He is not remembered within the Tareth Officer Corps for anything that happened at Keth-Severon. This is because the official record says the exchange was inconclusive. An inconclusive exchange does not mark an officer's record in the way a formal loss would. There was nothing to remember. I asked Commander Verksal at the end of our conversation whether he had ever discussed the exchange with anyone, colleagues, family, other officers with border corridor experience. He said no. I asked why. He said, because the conversation I would have had to have in order to discuss it honestly is not a conversation I knew how to start. You cannot begin that conversation in the middle. You have to begin at the beginning, and the beginning is, everything you think you know about humans as a category may be structured around the wrong assumptions, and that is not a comfortable beginning. People do not receive it well. They receive it as hyperbole, or as post-event rationalization, or as an officer who lost an exchange in a demonstrative session and found a philosophical framework to make sense of it. None of those interpretations are incorrect, exactly. They are just not complete. He paused. And also, he said, there is the other reason. I asked what that was. He looked at me for a moment with the careful measuring look he had used when I arrived, the look of a person deciding what level of honesty the situation warranted. Then he said, because I could not answer the question. I asked which question. The one that follows naturally, he said. If someone says, what did you find in that room? The question that comes next is, what are humans then? If they are not what the briefing says they are, what are they? And I don't know the answer. I am not being modest. I spent 40 years looking at it from the sides, looking for the answer in the limited ways available to me without actively pursuing it, and I do not have the answer. And I was not willing to begin a conversation by saying there is something unusual about humans that I cannot characterize, because the next question is always, well, how unusual? And the honest answer is, I don't know, and I don't know how to find out, and neither does the briefing material, and possibly neither does the conclave. He stopped. And that answer, he said, has a way of ending conversations, particularly with people who believe the conclave's understanding of the species in this corridor is comprehensive. I am going to record here the thing I have not recorded elsewhere in this file. Before I left Commander Verksal's compound on the day of my visit, I asked him one more question. It is not in the standard deposition format. It is not the kind of question the archive of formal encounters normally asks. I asked it because I am an old archivist and I have learned, over the course of a career spent documenting what actually happened in rooms where things went wrong, that the most important question is often the one that falls outside the standard format. I asked him, when the session ended and the platform staff escorted the Richetier attaché out of the chamber, what did she do? He said she walked toward the door and she stopped about 3 paces from the door. She turned around, she looked at me. I asked what her expression was. He said, I have been trying to characterize it for 40 years. It was not triumph. It was not contempt. It was not the expression of someone who has finished a competition. It was, he stopped, thought. It was the expression of someone who was doing an assessment and had just completed the first stage of it. I asked what he meant. He said, not what I could do, she knew that, what I would do, what I would conclude, whether I would be, he stopped again. Whether I would be the kind of person who updated his picture of the situation based on what had just happened, or the kind of person who filed an inconclusive result and kept his existing picture intact. I asked what he thought she concluded. He said, I think she concluded that I was the first kind, and then she nodded once and turned back and walked out the door. I asked whether he had any idea what the assessment was for. He said no. He said, that is the part that stayed with me, not the exchange, not the techniques. Not the 40 minutes afterward. What stayed with me was the look at the door, because it told me something that the exchange itself had only implied. I asked what that was. He said that we were not, from her perspective, being assessed because we were a threat. We were being assessed because we were, from her perspective, potentially useful, or potentially interesting, or potentially worth categorizing. The exchange was not a defense and it was not a demonstration. It was a test administered by someone who was not threatened, someone who had time. He paused. Someone who was not in a hurry, he said. That is what I have never been able to stop thinking about. The humans in that corridor, the Richetier authority, the delegates, the woman in that room, none of them were in a hurry. They were doing something, and they had been doing it for a long time, and they intended to continue doing it, and the timeline they were operating on was not the timeline of a compact negotiation or a military observer's posting or even an officer's career. The timeline they were operating on was something I did not have a unit of measurement for. He looked at the window. The deep indigo of the Tarath night had fully settled. The conclave thinks it is old, he said. The conclave thinks it has been doing this long enough to understand the shape of things in this corridor. The species in the compact have been at this for thousands of years in some cases. The Tarath have been at it for longer than most, and in all of that time, across all of that accumulated history of compact negotiations and border encounters and demonstrative exchanges and capability assessments, he stopped, looked at me. In all of that time, has the conclave's understanding of what humans are changed in any fundamental way, or has it remained what it was at the beginning with some details added? I said nothing, because the question was not the kind the archive of formal encounters answers. The question was the kind you live with. He nodded, as if my silence was itself a sufficient answer. She walked out of that room, he said, and she was not in a hurry. That is the only conclusion I was able to reach that I am confident is accurate. She walked out of that room as if she had done what she came to do, and what she came to do was only one part of a larger thing she was doing, and the larger thing was not going to be done for a very long time, and she knew that, and it did not concern her. He stood slowly, with the deliberateness of an old man whose joints register the seasons. The official record says she lost, he said. The official record is what it is. I signed it. He walked me to the door of his compound. The sky above the mineral ridges was the deep indigo of a Tarath night, with the single cold point of a far star visible at the horizon. Nobody asks who woke up asking questions, he said. That is the thing nobody puts in the record, not the win or the loss, what it left behind in the person who was there. He said goodnight and went inside. I have sealed this file at the highest available classification tier. It will not be published in my lifetime. It will not be published in the lifetimes of the current conclave membership. In 100 years, whoever opens it will find the complete record, the official account, the depositions, the administrative staff's testimony about the 40 minutes, the 3 sample depositions I described here, and the pattern across all 9, and this addendum. They will find the account of Commander Verksal, and the 40 years he spent in the productive company of a question he could not resolve. They will find the record of the look at the door, and what he believed it meant. And they will do with it what the scholars of their era will do, assign it a framework I cannot anticipate, or fail to assign it one, or add it to a different set of patterns that will be visible to them in 100 years, in the way it is not fully visible to me now. What I can tell them, as the archivist who assembled this file, is only what I am trained to tell, that this is what happened. That the official record is what it is. That Commander Verksal signed it. That the woman in the chamber walked out of it as if she had somewhere else to be, and was not in a hurry to get there, and the timeline she was operating on did not require her to be. That the question she left behind in the room was not, what is she capable of? The question she left behind was, how long have they been at this, and how much of it have we simply failed to notice because our assessment categories were not built to see it? I do not have the answer to that question. I do not believe the conclave does either. I will say one more thing, which is personal rather than archival, and which I record here because this addendum is already personal, and it would be dishonest to stop now. In the 3 years since my visit to Commander Verksal's compound, I have thought often about the maps on his walls, the border corridor charts from the compact era. All of them filled in, all the corridors mapped and annotated in his careful hand, the routes and the station positions and the patrol schedules, and the compact boundaries marked in the faded notation of a career spent in those spaces. All of them except the one where human space lies. That space on his walls was blank. Not absent, the frames were there, the charts were there, but the human corridor was the only one he had not annotated. 40 years of archival habits, and he had not written a single note across that territory. I have decided to take that as a form of wisdom, though I could not tell you precisely what it is wise about. Only that a man who spent his life mapping things chose, deliberately and over the course of many decades, not to map that one. And that he lived with that blank space on his wall every day and did not appear to find it troubling. He appeared to find it honest. I am sealing this file now. The seal date is today's date, and the classification is permanent, and the archive of formal encounters will forward it to the Tier 1 vault before the end of this season. Whatever comes next is not my department. Precision is my department, and I have been precise.